The old man in room 4 had no visitors, no chart that listed next of kin, and 41 hours left to live. And the only person in the building who knew his first name was a night nurse who made $11 an hour and would not let go of his hand. She did not know who he was. She did not know that a man worth more than the hospital itself was already on a plane, that lawyers in 3 cities were awake at that hour because of the man in the bed, that the hand she held had signed papers no clerk in that wing could have imagined. She only knew the monitor was slowing, that the room was cold the way those rooms always got near the end, and that nobody should leave this world alone. Her name was Nia, and she had worked the overnight shift on the 4th floor of Mercy General for 6 years. And in all that time she had never once clocked out while a patient was dying alone. That was the rule she kept that no supervisor had written down. There were rules in the binder. And there was the rule in her chest. And the rule in her chest was the one she answered to at 3 a.m, when the floor went quiet and the families had gone home, and the only sounds were the hum of the machines and the soft chime of a call light down the hall. Stay close. Somebody's about to learn how much a stranger can be worth. The man in room 4 had come in 4 days earlier with no wallet, a cheap coat, shoes worn down at the heel, and a name he gave the intake clerk in a voice so thin she had to ask him twice. He said it was Walter. He gave no last name that anyone wrote down clearly, and the one on the bracelet was misspelled, and for 4 days he had been, to the staff who passed his door, simply the old man in 4, the charity case, the one nobody would be calling about. Nia did not see him that way. She never saw any of them that way. The first night she had him, she found him awake at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling tile, and she pulled the chair close and asked if he wanted the television on, and he said no, he wanted to talk, if she had a minute. She did not have a minute. She had 11 patients and a med pass and a chart that was behind. And the new aide had called out, so she was running the floor a body short, and her feet were already a low fire inside the taped shoe. She sat down anyway. There is a kind of tired that tells you to keep moving, and a kind that tells you to sit, and she had learned over 6 years to know the difference, and this old man's eyes on the ceiling were the second kind. He told her he had been a builder once. He told her his hands used to be good for something. He held them up in the dim light, those big spotted hands with the knuckles swollen, and he turned them over slowly, like he was reading something written in the lines, and he said the trouble with getting old was that the body forgot what the hands remembered. He asked her if she had ever made something with her hands that outlived the making. She thought about it honestly, the way he seemed to want, and she said she had made 3 children, and they were the best thing she would ever build, and the only thing she cared to. He looked at her a long moment when she said it. Something moved behind his eyes that she did not have a name for then, and would understand only. Later she laughed softly because he wanted her to, and because the room was heavy, and laughter let a little air in. She did not know that the buildings those hands had raised stood in 12 cities, that one of them was the tower you could see from the parking garage of Mercy General itself, the glass one that went gold at sunset. She thought he was a poor old man with a good story. She liked him for the story. The next night he was weaker, and the night after that he could not lift the cup of water to his own mouth. And Nia held it for him and steadied his chin with 2 fingers the way she would have for her own grandfather. And he drank, and he thanked her, and a tear ran down into the white stubble on his cheek, and he did not wipe it because he could not, and she wiped it for him. He asked her why she was kind to an old man with nothing. She told him kindness did not check your bank account at the door. He closed his eyes when she said it. He held the words a long moment, the way a man holds water in cupped hands, careful, like it might be the last of something. Nia had her own reasons to be tired and her own reasons to be hard, and she was neither. She had 3 children at home and a mother with failing kidneys and a rent that went up $90 in January, and she worked the overnight because it paid $1 more an hour than days, and because her mother could watch the children while they slept. Her oldest, a girl of 14 named Tasha, had started ironing her own school clothes, and her brothers too, without being asked, the way children do when they have learned the house runs on a thin margin and they want to lift even one small thing off their mother. Nia had come home one morning to find all 3 uniforms pressed and hung on the bathroom door, and her daughter asleep at the kitchen table with her, head on her arms, and she had stood in the doorway in her grey scrubs, and not known whether to be proud or to weep. And she had done a little of both quietly, so as not to wake the girl. She had not bought herself anything new in 2 years. The scrubs she wore had been washed so many times the navy had gone grey at the seams, and the white shoes she stood in for 12 hours a night had a hole starting at the left toe that she had patched from the inside with tape, because new ones were $40 and $40 was the electric bill. She drove a car with 190,000 miles on it and a check engine light she had learned to ignore the way you learn to ignore a sound in an old house. There were months she paid the light bill or the car insurance, but not both, and chose and lay awake doing the math that never came out right, no matter how many times she ran it. She kept a shoebox in the closet with the bills sorted by how late they were, and on the bad nights she would take it down and lay them out on the bed like a hand of cards she could not win with, and then she would put them back and pray over the box without quite admitting that was what she was doing, and go to work and hold somebody else's hand, because that at least she knew how to do. None of that came into room 4 with her. She left it at the door the way she left her coat in the break room. Inside that room she was only a pair of warm hands and a steady voice, and for the man called Walter that was the whole world. On the 4th night the charge nurse told her his numbers were dropping, and that comfort care was the order now, no more interventions, just keep him comfortable, and that the social worker had not found family, and that if he passed on her shift, she should call the on-call and document the time. Nia nodded and signed where she had to sign. Then she went into room 4, and she did not come out for the rest of the night. She pulled the chair to the side of the bed, the side near the window, and she took his hand in both of hers, and she stayed. The city glowed orange through the glass, the skyline she knew by heart, and somewhere out there in one of those lit towers was an answer she did not have and did not need. The man's breathing had gone shallow and slow. His eyes opened sometimes and found her, and closed again, and each time they found her something in his face eased, the way a child's face eases when it sees that the light in the hall is still on. Around midnight he surfaced enough to speak. He asked her name. She told him. Nia, he said it back to himself twice, softly, like he was setting it somewhere safe. He said he had a son. He said it the way you confess something. He said he had a son, and they had not spoken in 11 years, and he did not know how to fix it now. There was no time now, and his voice cracked on the word time and went to pieces. Nia held his hand tighter. She told him it was not too late for the boy to know he was loved, even if it was too late to say it to his face, because love left a mark that outlasted the saying. She did not know if she believed that for herself. She believed it for him. He squeezed her hand with what strength he had, and it was not much, and it was everything. Outside the door the floor went on with its small machinery of the night, the cartwheels, the low voices, the cool lights blooming and fading. Nobody came for the old man in 4, so she stayed. She talked to him through the worst of it, low and even, about nothing, about her children, about the way her youngest still climbed into bed during thunderstorms even though he was 9, and told everyone at school he was not afraid of anything. She told him his name was Marcus, and that he collected bottle caps in an old coffee can, and could tell you where he found each one. She told him about her mother's garden, the tomatoes that never came in right, the one rosebush that bloomed against all sense out by the chain link. She told him the city would be beautiful at dawn, that he should try to stay for it. The way the light came up pink over the river and turned all that cold glass warm for a few minutes before the day got hard again. He smiled at that, a small thing at the corner of his mouth, and she watched the smile and did not look away. And she made herself a promise that whatever else happened, she would be the last warm thing he felt. Once, around 2, the call light went off down the hall, room 6, and she heard the mourning of it in her own bones, the pull of the 11 other people who were also hers that night. She rose halfway out of the chair. The old man's hand tightened on hers. Not from fear, she thought later, but from the simple animal knowledge that warmth was leaving, and she looked at the door and looked at him and made the choice she would make again. She keyed the call button on the wall and asked the aide, "Renee, to cover 6, please, just for an hour. She could not leave 4. Renee did not ask why. They had worked nights together for years, and there were things you did not have to explain to a woman who had also stayed. So Renee took 6, and Nia took the chair again, and the old man let his breath out long and slow as though something had been decided in his favour. The night wore down. His breaths spaced out, long gaps between them now, and in each gap she leaned closer, and then another would come, ragged and slow, and she would let out the breath she'd have been holding with him. She did not pray out loud because she did not know what he believed. But she prayed in the silent part of herself, the part that had kept her standing through years that would have folded a harder woman. She prayed he would not be afraid. She prayed his son would somehow know. She prayed, though she would not have called it that the world kept some kind of ledger, that nothing this tender went unrecorded. If you have ever sat with someone at the end, you know the thing that happens to time in that room, the way an hour can hold a life. Stay with that feeling a moment, because it is the whole of this story. Then she turned back to the bed. Near 4 a.m, he opened his eyes wide, clearer than he had been in days, and he looked at her and he said, "You stayed." 2 words. She said, "Of course I stayed." He said, "Nobody stays." She said, "I do." And he looked at her for a long moment with those clear eyes, and whatever he saw there seemed to settle something in him that had been unsettled for 11 years. And he said, soft and certain, "You are the richest person I have ever met." She thought it was the kind of thing a dying man says. She told him to rest. He closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, and somewhere past 5 a.m, with the first grey coming up at the edge of the window, and his hand still warm. In both of hers, the old man called Walter stopped. The monitor told her what she already knew. She did not let go right away. She sat with him in the grey light and finished what she had promised, which was simply to not let go too soon, and then she folded his hands on his chest, and she smoothed the thin hair back from his forehead, and she said the only goodbye she had, which was "Thank you for letting me stay." Then she did the things the job required. She noted the time. She called the on-call. She filled in the lines of the form, her handwriting steady, though her hands were not. And she did not yet know that the worst-paid woman in the building had just spent the night holding the hand of one of the richest men in the country, that the cheap coats in the closet had been bought on purpose, because he had wanted, at the end, to find out who would be kind to a man with nothing, that he had checked himself into Mercy General under his middle name, with the shoes worn down on purpose, and the wallet left at home on purpose, a final test he had set for a world he had stopped trusting decades ago. She did not know that he had passed the test in room 4, and that she was the one who had given it to him. Morning shift came on at 7. Nia gave report, her voice rough. And she did not mention what the night had cost her, because the night always costs something, and you did not bill the hospital for it. The day nurse, taking 4, a younger woman named Carla, glanced at the room number and then at Nia's face and did not ask. Only put a hand on her shoulder for a second on her way to the cart, and that was the whole of it, the way nurses say "I know" without saying it. Nia was gathering her things in the break room, her grey bag and her cold coffee, when the floor changed. She felt it before she understood it. The elevator opened and men in dark suits came out, and they did not move like family, and they did not move like staff. They moved like people accustomed to rooms going quiet when they entered. The hospital administrator came hurrying down the hall in a jacket he had clearly put on in the car, his face the colour of the wall, his badge on crooked. A woman with a leather folder. 2 men who stationed themselves by the elevator and watched everything with the flat patient. Eyes of people paid to watch, and in the middle of them a man of perhaps 50, tall, grey at the temples, in a coat that cost more than Nia made in 3 months, and his face was wrecked, his eyes red. A man who had been crying in a car and had stopped only because he had run out of road. They went straight to room 4. Nia stood in the break room doorway with her cold coffee and watched the son of the old man called Walter go in to see his father, 11 years too late, and come out a few minutes later changed in the way grief changes a face, hollowed. And she understood then that whoever the old man had been, he had not been nobody. The administrator was talking fast and low. The woman with the folder was writing, and the son turned in the hall and asked a question, and the administrator did not know the answer, and they sent for the charge nurse, and the charge nurse pointed down the hall, and every head turned toward the break room, where Nia stood frozen with her bag on her shoulder. The son walked toward her. She braced for the thing she always braced for, the complaint, the question about a protocol, the family that wanted to know why more had not been done. He stopped in front of her. He was a head taller than she was, and he had to look down, and his voice when it came was not the voice of a powerful man. It was the voice of a son. He asked, "Were you with him?" She said yes. He asked at the end. She said all night. And the tall man in the expensive coat put his hand over his mouth, and his shoulders shook, and he stood in the hallway of Mercy General and wept in front of a night nurse and a half-dozen staff, and did not care who saw. And when he could speak again, he asked her to tell him, please, every word his father had said, because he had not been there, and he would never be there. And the words she carried were all he would ever have of his father's last night on earth. So Nia told him. She told him about the builder's hands and the buildings in 12 cities she had thought were a story. She told him about the water held to the cracked lips and the tear she had wiped away. She told him his father had spoken of a son, that he had said they had not spoken in 11 years, that he had grieved it at the end and wished there had been time. She watched the man break apart and put himself back together with every sentence. She told him his father's last clear words, that he had said she was the richest person he had ever met, and she said she had thought it was just something a dying man says. The son shook his head slowly. He said no. He said his father had said that to exactly one other person in his life, his mother, 40 years ago, and he had meant it, as the highest thing he knew how to say, that a person's worth was not in what they had, but in what they gave when they thought. No one was counting. And then the son told her who his father was. He said the name. He said the company. He said the tower you could see from the parking garage, the glass one that went gold at sunset, that his father had built that, and 40 others, that the man she had held all night had been worth something near $2 billion, and that he had spent the last 10 years of his life convinced that everyone who came near him came for the money, that the world had taught him no one was kind without a reason, and that he had checked himself into this hospital under a false name, in a poor man's coat to die the way a poor man dies, and find out, one last time, whether anyone would be good to him when he had nothing to give. The hall had gone silent. The administrator's mouth was open, and the son looked at Nia with his ruined eyes and said, "You passed his test. You did not know it was a test. That is why you passed." Nia did not know what to say to that. She said the only true thing she had, which was that she had not done anything special, that she had only stayed, that anyone would have stayed. The son said no. He said nobody stays. He said it almost word for word the way his father had said it in the dark, at 4 a.m. And Nia felt the night close over her like deep water, the old man's voice and the son's voice saying the same true thing, 11 years and 1 death. Apart, the son took her hand, the same hand that had held his father's, and he held it in both of his the way she had held the old man's, and he thanked her. Then he asked her to sit down with him, because there were things to discuss, and she said she had to get home her children, her mother, and he said it would not take long, and something in the way he said it made her sit. What came next did not happen the way Nia would have written it, fast and clean. It happened the way real things happen, in offices and over signatures over the next several weeks, with the lawyers she had seen in the hall and a great deal of paper. The beginning of it, though, came that morning in a small consultation room off the 4th floor, with the city coming fully awake outside the window, and a cup of real coffee someone brought her that she was too stunned to drink. The son told her that his father had left instructions. Not a will exactly, those were settled long ago, but a letter a sealed letter the lawyers had been holding for 3 years, with orders to open it only upon his death. And the letter said that whoever showed his father true kindness in his final days, kindness given to a man they believed had nothing, was to be found and was to be cared for, because his father had wanted to prove to himself before the end that such a person still existed in the world, and if such a person was found, that person was to want for nothing for the rest of their life. The son said the lawyers had assumed the letter was the sentiment of a lonely old man, and that no such person would be found. They had been wrong. She had been found. She had found herself by staying. Nia sat in the small room and could not make the words mean what they meant. She kept thinking about the rent that went up $90 and the check engine light and the scrubs gone grey at the seams. And the words the son was saying floated above all of it like something on a screen, happening to someone else. He told her there would be a fund. He told her the children's education was handled. All 3, as far as they wanted to go, paid in full. He told her the medical bills, her mother's dialysis, the years of it ahead, handled. He told her the house she rented could be bought and put in her name if she wanted it, or any house she chose, and that there would be enough, carefully managed, that she would never again work a night because she had to, only if she wanted to. And he told her the last thing his father had specified, the thing that broke her, that the person who stayed was to be given a sum the old man had named precisely in the letter, a sum he had chosen it, because the exact amount of the first contract he had ever signed as a young builder, the contract that had started everything 50 years before. $1,000. The son said his father had wanted it to be that number, that beginning number, because he had wanted his kindness to be someone else's beginning. Nia put her face in her hands and she wept. Not the way you weep from sorrow, but the way you weep when a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was a weight is suddenly lifted off your back and you feel the place where it was. She had not cried for the old man at the bedside because the job did not allow it. She cried now for him and for herself and for her children and for the strange and terrible mercy of a world that had, against all her evidence, kept a ledger after all. She thought of him saying, "You are the richest person I have ever met." And she understood now that he had not been speaking of the night. He had been speaking of what he had already decided to do. She had been rich in his eyes from the moment she pulled the chair to the bed and stayed. The weeks that followed had their own weather. There were forms, and there were meetings, and there was the strange experience of sitting across a polished table from lawyers who treated her, a night nurse in her good blouse, like a person who mattered, because to the old man's estate she did. The first meeting she had worn the only blouse she owned that did not come from the discount rack, a cream-coloured thing she had bought for her daughter's 8th grade graduation, and she had pressed it herself at 5 a.m, and worried the whole drive that it was wrong, that they would look at her and see exactly what she was. They looked at her and stood when she entered the room. A young paralegal named Joy brought her water in a glass, not a cup, and asked if the temperature was all right, and Nia did not know what to do with being asked. The son, whose name was David, came to several of the meetings himself, which his lawyers told her was unusual, and Nia came to understand that the old man's son was trying to do for her in his father's name the thing he had not been able to do for his father in life, which was to show up. He asked about her children. He learned their names, Tasha and the middle boy Andre and little Marcus, and he wrote them in a small notebook he carried. And the next time she saw him, he asked about Marcus's ears specifically by name, and she realized he had remembered, and that remembering was a kind of money too, one she had been poorer in than she knew. He sent, the first week, a mechanic to her building who looked at the car with the 190,000 miles and the lights she had learned to ignore, and the man spent 20 minutes under the hood, and then stood up wiping his hands and told her gently that the kindest thing anyone could do for this car was let it rest. The next day, there was a different car in the lot, paid for, a quiet, reliable thing with no light on the dash. And Nia sat in it in the parking lot and put her hands on the wheel and could not drive for a while because of how steady it felt How the engine turned over on the first try and just ran, no holding her breath, no listening for the sound. Her mother started dialysis at the good centre across town instead of the crowded one, with the appointments that did not require her to leave at 4 in the morning. And she came home from the first one and said the chairs reclined, and a woman had brought her a warm blanket, and she said it twice. The part about the blanket, because small dignities land hardest on people who have gone without them. Her youngest, the one who still climbed into her bed in thunderstorms, got the surgery on his ears that the insurance had called elective for 3 years, and the ringing he had never told her about, because he thought it was normal, went quiet, and he heard the rain instead of the ringing for the first time, and he told her so. He said, "Mama, the rain is loud, with wonder in it," and she had to leave the room. None of it felt real, and all of it was real. She kept working at Mercy General because she wanted to, because the floor was hers and the patients were hers, and she did not know who she would be if she stopped being the woman who stayed. She worked days now, and she did not count the $1 an hour anymore, and the strangest part was how little it changed about the work itself. She still held hands. She still steadied cups to cracked lips. She still learned the names. Families forgot to write on the board and used them. What changed was only that she was no longer afraid, that the shoebox of bills was gone from the closet, and the math that never came out right had finally come out, and she found that the fear had been a weight on the kindness all along, a thing she had given despite, and now she gave it freely with nothing pulling the other way. And it felt, she told her daughter once, like singing after years of humming so the neighbours would not hear. On the 4th floor there was a new policy now that bore no one's name. A quiet line in the comfort care orders that said no patient on this unit dies alone, and a small fund that paid for a nurse to sit the last hours when no family could, and everyone assumed the hospital had always done it that way. Nia knew where it came from. She had been the one to ask David for it, the only thing she asked for herself that was not for herself, and he had made it happen with a phone call and the word endowed. And now somewhere on the 4th floor of Mercy General, tonight and every night, there was a chair pulled close to a bed, and a warm hand in the dark for someone the world had stopped counting. The old man got the dawn he had not stayed for, in a way. David buried his father and then did the thing his father had wanted, which was to come back to the relationship he had thrown away, except his father was gone. So he did it sideways, through Nia and her children, through the fund, through showing up. He told Nia once, near the end of all the paperwork, that his father had spent $2 billion and a lifetime building things out of glass and steel, and that the only thing he had ever heard his father call the richest in the world was a woman who made $11 an hour and would not let go of a stranger's hand. He said it like a man trying to learn a lesson late. Nia told him it was not too late for him either, that love left a mark that outlasted the saying. And she watched her own words from that night come back around and land on the son the way they had. Landed on the father, and she understood that she had been carrying the old man's last gift to his boy without knowing it the words all along. A year after the night in room 4, Nia stood in the kitchen of a house that was hers, with her name on the deed, and a rosebush her mother had transplanted from the old chain link blooming against all sense by the back step. She watched her 3 children eat breakfast at a table that did not wobble, and her mother sat in the good morning light with colour back in her face, and the youngest told a long story about nothing and heard himself tell it. On the windowsills above the sink Nia kept one thing from that night, the only thing she had asked the estate for that was not practical. It was the hospital bracelet, the cheap plastic one with the misspelled name, the one that had said the old man was nobody. She had asked the morning charge nurse to save it before they cleaned the room. On an instinct she could not have explained, and she had kept it. And now it sat on the sill where the dawn came up pink over the rooftops, the way she had promised him it would, and turned all that ordinary glass warm for a few minutes before the day got busy. Sometimes, drying a dish, she would touch it. She did not need it to remember. She kept it because some things should be kept. The old man had checked into the world's hospital, convinced no one was good for nothing, and he had found out at the very end in the dark, that he was wrong, and being wrong about that had been the last and best thing that ever happened to him. He told her she was the richest person he had ever met, standing in her kitchen in the warm light with her children fed and her mother well, and her name on the door. Nia finally understood that he had been telling her the truth, and that he had only ever meant the one true thing, which was that what you give when no one is counting is the only wealth that gets counted in the end. The bracelet caught the light. She set the dish in the rack and went to call the children for school, and the rosebush bloomed by the step, and the morning came up gold over the city the old man had built, and somewhere in a tower he had raised with hands that forgot what they remembered, the lights came on for another day. If you have ever stayed when you could have gone, when no one would have known you left, tell me about it, because the world keeps a longer memory than we think. And if this story stayed with you, there is another one waiting, about a woman who gave away her last warm coat to a stranger at a bus stop and learned 3 winters later exactly whose shoulders she had covered.